Howard Zimmerman, I understand that the Department of Buildings is concerned about the safety of buildings built with cavity wall construction. Can you explain what this is and what kind of buildings are affected by this?
In the old days, pre-war buildings were built solid mass, 3, 4, 5 layers of brick, all just put together. In the 50s, the engineers and architects wanted to come up with a lighter, quicker method of building. So they came up with a cavity wall system, which was basically a cement block on the inside, a 2-inch air gap, and a brick veneer on the outside. And the brick veneer was tied back to the backup block with what's very critical at the time, corrugated aluminum wall ties. And basically, the wall ties prevented the brick from peeling away and kept it parallel to the backup block on the inboard side of the construction wall.
Now, these are not the white brick buildings.
White brick is a type of brick that is used in the cavity wall construction. Cavity wall is a description of the type of construction. The white glazed brick is just a type of brick that was used in cavity wall construction. But they all have a backup block, wall ties, and brick outer veneer, whether it's red brick, white brick, or any color brick. It's still a cavity wall construction.
So can you tell me about a building where you found it? How do you find it?
So these buildings are late 1950s through the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and they're all over town. The problem is the earlier generation cavity wall construction buildings are now 70 years old. And the weak link in the system is not the backup block, because that's on the inboard side. It's resting nice and comfortably without being subject to wind, rain, or any of the elements. The brick on the outside has become more porous, but the wall ties that connected the backup block and the brick veneer, the first generation of late 50s, early 60s was corrugated aluminum, galvanized aluminum, sorry, and that has rusted over the time. And as generations of cavity wall construction got built, later on the codes required, the original code required every 4 feet on center. Later codes required the wall ties to be placed every 2 feet on center. And we have found 50 years later that the original corrugated wall ties, the galvanized wall ties, are rusting. And if you can imagine, if I'm holding the brick with a wall tie that's supposed to keep it parallel, and these wall ties are rusting and deteriorated, all of a sudden the bricks can fall off and out. And there have been examples of many buildings where brick have fallen off the building, either as a result of deteriorated wall ties, insufficient wall ties, or just aging.
So how do you find them? How do you find this?
So the building department, in the last FISP cycle, the 8th cycle, just raised the bar on all architects and engineers, and they were requiring reports on cavity wall construction, because the building department had made an edict basically saying, we, the building department, believe cavity wall construction is in failure. Prove to us that it's not. So you were guilty unless proven innocent. And I say that in a loving way, but they were right. And all of a sudden now, instead of a visual inspection, now we're required to actually do probes and actually report on the condition of the wall ties, or the absence of wall ties, and the condition of wall ties.
And does this happen during the FISP inspections that you do the probes?
Yes. This is a requirement for the new cycle, the ninth cycle. But we knew in the eighth cycle that this was coming, and the building department was looking very critically at two things. In pre-war buildings, they were going after the terracotta because they believed terracotta was in failure, and they were going after the cavity wall construction, and they wanted the architects and engineers to report on the wall ties. So in the eighth cycle, we as a group had to report and do more probes. It was more on a voluntary or reporting basis. Now, going into the ninth cycle, it is a requirement that probes be performed to report on the condition of the wall ties.
So give me an idea of what happens if you have a building hired you to come and do file their report, you do probes, and you find this problem, and they've already budgeted for waterproofing or whatever it is. Tell me what the fallout is.
So, perfect example. We have a building that we started work on in 2018. It's a 18-story red brick, late 50s cavity wall construction building that we wanted to do repair of the spandrel beams and repair of the flashing of the spandrel beams. It was a $1.3 million project and about an 8 to 10 month timeline to complete. At the very beginning, during the stage of mobilization, we did some further, once we got a contractor on the job, we actually did some probes and found that the wall ties were installed per the 1938 code, which was legal at the time that the building was built, but it's no longer adequate because those were built at 4 foot on center, not 2 foot on center. And the existing wall ties were more deteriorated than they should have been, and we were concerned that in the process of removing 3 or 4 courses of brick in order to access the spandrel beams to waterproof them and repair the spandrel beams, that the removal process would destabilize the rest of the brick and it would fall down. So we had to present to the building this problem with the original construction of the building. And obviously we did our homework, and a full reskin of all 4 sides would take the project from a $1.3 million project to a $6 million project, and from a 8 to 10 month project to a 2.5 year project.
Whoa.
Obviously not good news. No happy campers in the audience. But, they asked us to put on our thinking caps, and we came up with this final option to just reskin the primary facades, the 2 street, an avenue and a street facade. And then we were going to, on the rear facades, we're going to actually use a structural pin to drill through the outer brick, go through the cavity and insert it into the backup, and therefore basically putting new wall ties in without having to take the brick out. And they accepted this as a hybrid. We'll get a new facade on the 2 primary facades. We'll salvage the rear facades. Still unhappy, but it was a reasonable compromise. And for that, it was, instead of going up to something million, we brought it down to $4.4 million. Oh. And a little less than 2 years. So, it was a lot more, unfortunately, than the original budget, but was not in excess of $6 million, which a full reskin would have cost. And everybody felt that it was a reasonable workout of the problem.
And for boards who live in buildings of this era, what would you suggest the takeaway for them is?
Um, it's like anything else. The older we get, the more care we need, including, my generation, and you read about lots of buildings, or you walk the streets of Manhattan and you see many white glazed brick buildings that are turned into red brick buildings, or there was a blue building on Madison Avenue and 66th Street that was reskinned, and originally, many years ago, the Vermeer, which was on 7th Avenue and 13th Street, about 20 years ago, that was the first cavity wall building that was ever reskinned. And that began, and that just deteriorated more rapidly than every other building. And the building made a decision, listen, this is costing us a fortune, and eventually we have to bite the bullet and reskin it. More and more buildings are getting to that period of time where we could go on and on and on and fixing this problem and spending a lot of money and mobilization and fixing and fixing and fixing, or eventually come to the decision, listen, we have to reskin this building and we may as well do it now rather than 10 years or 20 years down the road.
Okay, that is wise words and something for all boards to grapple with. Thank you very much. Much
They
appreciated.
do grapple.